got some great panels here from a variety of perspectives. You know, Ian's got a lot of experience with the Conservative Party of Canada, Anne's got experience with the Liberal Party of Canada, and Peggy's got experience with the New Democratic Party of Canada. But what actually unites them is they're all just terrific, lovely people. And have all sorts of great things to say. And so I've explained to them that I just want to get a conversation going about leadership in politics and how can we have strong leaders, how can we have ethical leaders. But really I'm hoping you'll chat amongst each other more than me necessarily ask you loads of questions. So, but I'd like to start with Anne. You know, Anne, out of everybody in this room, as far as I'm aware, you've held some of the most senior portfolios, and you've been very, you know, held as senior, many senior leadership positions. You're still holding leadership positions. What kinds of things should we all think about in when we're trying to encourage others to be leaders, or maybe there's people in this room who want to be leaders, or maybe there are leaders here as well. What would you say to them?
Well, you know, it's not an easy question, actually. Ethical leaders, I think there are other words you could substitute for ethical leader, right? It may be moral in terms of living by a moral code, being a good person, being an honest person. When you're talking about ethical leaders, they are people who, in fact, lead by example. They are people who, and this is important, they treat everyone with respect. They communicate their expectations clearly to those with whom they work. So it's tone at the top. And whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, and there's been a huge amount of work done in the governance sector around public markets and leaders in major corporations. You know, it's interesting. If you're a newly elected person, how do you know what all the rules are? How do you know that you can't take a ticket to a hockey game, right? Or you shouldn't take that ticket. It's not going to be perceived well. It would be nice if everybody came to their job just having that gut check, but that's hard. That's hard. So I think it's incumbent upon each one of us as elected representatives and our parties and the governments we're part of to educate in terms of and I hate to talk about rules, but you get caught up by not following the rules, right? There are codes of conduct, that's a regulatory regime, right? There are ethics commissioners and officers who you can go to and ask a question of if your gut is telling you, maybe I shouldn't do this. These are all good things, actually, that help protect the individual and the institution. Because if you do not understand where the lines are, and if you are not held accountable and take responsibility, and if there are not consequences, all of you and every voter in this country starts to lose trust in their institutions. And for me, at the end of the day, ethical accountability and responsibility is ensuring that people have trust in their institutions.
Can I jump in
Yes,
here? Because I think that's exactly where my mind went to, was that if you don't have confidence or you don't believe in the ethics of those in charge, in other words, if you feel that they are more concerned about their own welfare or their party's welfare or their survival, you're going to lose faith in institutions. And I mean, I've done a lot of election observation around the world, and I think Canada actually has pretty good institutions. Elections Canada is pretty well respected, but there are lots of examples where trust is close to zero in institutions. People may show up for an election, but they don't believe the outcome is going to be fair. So I think I agree with you that it is about serving as an example and showing that kind of moral leadership. Two things I think about. One is following the rules and not screwing up, and if you do, having, you know, the confidence to fess up, and that can be really difficult. Like I've seen people like lose their seat because of a harassment, guilty verdict. That's, you know, it's tough, but leaders have to do that. But the other piece, I think, in addition to following the rules, is the authentic leadership of saying things and backing those things up with action. Because I think it really drives people crazy when politicians say one thing and do another. I just think then you get this cynicism that all politicians are the same. Why should I bother voting? And I think that's very dangerous, because when I was running for office, I spent a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time now teaching, trying to urge people to vote and the importance of it. People say, why should I bother? You guys are all the same. Well, I take personal offense to that, but I think
Sure,
that people,
yes.
you know, people should see a difference, and that they have a role to play, and it's not just putting a ballot in a box, but it's being part of the process. And you know, the most important part of that process is the people who actually step forward and decide that they're going to run. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts.
In the room today, there's a number of politicians. Some people may want to become elected officials. Some people in this room are elected officials. What kinds of things would you say to them about kind of moving up the career ladder, achieving what it is they want to achieve? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Team sport. It's a team sport of a particular type. And if you're not up for that kind of team sport part, there's still space, of course. But you have to decide whether you want to be in that team sport or not. And if you are, there's a way to do that and still keep yourself whole. And there's a way not to do that and still have an impact. And I think that's a good place to, if you can't figure that out in your first year as an elected official, ideally you work it out before you get elected to the party ticket.
The idea of the team sport is very interesting. There are people you identify pretty quickly as people who are going to struggle within the strictures of the party, whether it's the platform, if you're government, whether it's the strictures of having to work with ministers. Yes, and take the talking points and actually have to deliver them as a backbench MP, because you can't be offside. So all that to say on your team point, I think it's a very good one.
I think the question too is, first of all, have you chosen the right party? Because some people choose a party based on what party can get elected in a given area, and that may not reflect their personal value system. And it's like putting on a shoe that you love, but it's the wrong size, and it just is never going to feel right. And you can kind of suffer through it, but it's you're not going to be happy.
No.
You're not going to be happy. And it's a dilemma for people, you know. You may say, well, I was just talking with the Green representative, and you know, you may be passionate for the Green Party, but this area, you know, a particular area is not a Green Party area. So that is a dilemma, because I don't know, the way I always felt was I wouldn't run anywhere else but where I lived. You don't have to, you can run anywhere, but I have deep roots where I live. And like Bobby Ann, I love my constituency. I felt I wanted to be the spokesperson. I wanted to, in that seat in the House of Commons, I wanted to represent the views of the constituents of Parkdale High Park. And I loved it because you knock on doors, you hear people's stories, you get to tell those stories. I wrote a book about running for office, and I do talk in there about party or no party, because if you don't want anything to do with the party, Bobby Ann is the exception, but maybe city council is better for you, because you don't have to be limited by one party perspective. I'll just make one other quick point about the ethical leadership is, part of the job of a leader is make difficult decisions, but to inspire others to get involved. And I always thought that was one of the best things about politics, is that you can offer other people an opportunity to act on their values, on issues that they care about. And I know when we run campaigns, and I'm sure all parties it's the same, you inspire a lot of young people to get involved. If I ever knock on a door and somebody says, yeah, I think you're great, I say, well, come on, help us, or we're doing this, or we're having this event, come on out. And I have worked with leaders that I really admired, and I'm saying in politics and elsewhere, and sometimes you see people up close and they're not quite as they seem. And I just think one of the greatest tragedies would be to appear to be something as a leader and to have people inspired by your leadership and then see you up close and go, not exactly as advertised. And I just think that kind of churning of people can be a signal that maybe things aren't going well, then people aren't as they seem. And I think the best people that I have worked for or with, and I like to think I model that myself, is that what people see in you is who you are, and you behave accordingly. Because otherwise I think it leads to that cynicism.
What you said, Peggy, that you always lived in your riding. I actually think, and it also speaks to the ethical issue, people who are of the community, right? People who have worked in the community professionally and on a volunteer basis. People who know what's going on the streets and in the houses and in the businesses of their community. So and that would be your experience. That I think that is so important. That's parties like yours and mine sometimes parachute candidates in, and usually it doesn't work out all that well.
We've been known to have the odd.
Yes.
It usually doesn't work out that well. And it's because that person is not of and from the community. And they haven't done the work in the community, working in the when their kids were small in kindergarten, working in the community league, all the sports teams, talking to the mums and dads at the freezing to death in the hockey arena, or the soccer field, or whatever, on top of their professional job, their day-to-day work. And I think if you're of and from the community, that also helps answer the question that you should have, do I think this is an ethical person? Because if you have seen them at work, if you have seen them engage with the other dads or moms on the soccer field or in the hockey arena, not yelling obscenities at the other field, right? I mean, you actually, I think, get a sense of whether this is someone you would want to trust with your vote, and whether you think you could trust them to be your representative, not only yours, but for all your friends and neighbors in that particular community riding. Something that's quite important when assessing candidates. What have you done in the community to make the community better, in whatever ways you've had the capacity to be involved?
So, Cody, do you want to start things off? You had your hand up.
Yeah, good. Well, first of all, thank you to our panel for being here. It's great to have you come across the country, and good to have you back home. I know Edmonton's home, but so is the Hanshore.
Yeah.
And to our panel, I particularly appreciated that balance between a caucus team player versus the independents. Because as someone who pushed on carbon pricing to get adjustments, that was a very difficult dance in the last couple of years. But my question actually is for Bobby Ann. You mentioned you had been the president of the local EDA for 20 years. I don't know the entirety of the situation that it played out, but I think you were intending to run as the PC candidate, and they parachuted someone in, or they hand-selected someone, that being Party Central. And I give you all full kudos for running as an independent, for winning and doing that piece. piece. 2 questions. One is that a reflection, because I was in Oxford County when Mr. Poilievre had, with Dave McKenzie's daughter, we just appointed someone on the Liberal side, so not to be partisan, and we're done. Is that a reflection of the fact that there has been a weakening of the actual grassroots EDA movements that have more of that ability to help control and more of a central party and leadership trying to actually determine candidates? You know, is that a bit of that? And how have you seen that evolve over 20 years that you were involved? Second piece is, you know, you're proud to be an independent. Is there a world that you ever join a political party in the future again, or do you intend to continue to run as an independent for the extent that you can?
So I'll start backwards. I'll start with number 2. Thank
Yeah.
you for the 2 questions. I always say that, yes, I would go back home to the PC party if the house was clean. But the house has to be swept clean, and they have to, want me back as well.
Sure.
I don't think Premier Ford is anywhere near that, asking me to come home, and I wouldn't go home. And the other aspect of that is I would never go home unless the people of Hull and Norfolk said it was time to go home. It would be their decision. It'd be up to them. And right now, I believe, still to this day, 2 years later, that the people of Hull and Norfolk are very happy with their independent representation. There are a number of issues that were kind of swept under the rug for a number of years because, the member, and Toby and I have had this conversation, wasn't allowed to ask those questions because he was part of the party system. So a number of questions that have never been asked or should have been asked more publicly are now being asked, and the electorate really likes that. And I believe there has been a weakening of the grassroots, movement. What happened in my situation, and without getting into all of the details, is that the Premier came in and appointed a Liberal mayor. The mayor had actually run under the Liberal banner federally in a previous election, and so Premier Ford came in and said, "We're appointing this guy." And so I was the president, and of course I also worked for Toby Barrett, and we went to the Premier and said, "No, how do we run a nomination night? That's what democracy actually dictates." And so the Premier said, "No, we won't run a nomination night." And the truth of the matter is the Premier knew I'd sweep the floor with his candidate because I did it in a general election. But they did the fear-mongering. What are you going to do about it? And I said, well, I'm going to challenge it because as a conservative, as the Riding Association president, as somebody who has run countless campaigns across this province, I can't uphold this. I cannot stand behind this guy as a conservative candidate. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to challenge it as an independent. And the exact words were, well, you will be an embarrassment. You will get less than 5% of the vote. You will commit political suicide. And I said, that will be on me. And I said, I won't do any of those things. And so it is an erosion. I think that's the biggest change that I saw in my 23 years as Toby's executive assistant and also working in the party is that whole erosion of the grassroots system. The party used to call. They used to pick up the phone and say, hey, Bobby Ann, what do you know about this? We're on our way to a meeting. What do you know about this? Can you help us out here? That dried up. It dried up years ago. And it's because folks at the top, a handful of folks at the top thought they knew better.
So we're going to go here, then here, then here.
Okay. Thank you for sharing so openly, especially you, Bobby, your experiences. So I guess I'll use the disclaimer, I'm a bit of a disgruntled mayor. Working as an elected official at the municipal level, we are sometimes on the receiving end of the battles between political parties. But for this level of government, the municipal level of government, it's very much reflective of the community. What does the community need? What are we hearing from the community? And when you say the word grassroots, I very much feel like municipal politics is there. And so I guess my question would be around, how does ethics and truly being a representative of the entire community, despite party politics, where does that live? So you're elected, your party is in power. There's a lot of people who aren't part of your party that you still represent. where are the ethics there to make sure that everybody is feeling like they're heard, everybody is feeling like they are allowed to be heard and participate in that conversation of how do we grow our community, what does our community need? I mean, like, that's an easy question,
Are you
right?
addressing it to anyone in particular?
You go first, Peggy.
I like to think that you're representing everybody in your constituency, in your riding. You know, you get elected with part of the population, but certainly in terms of constituency work, you're going to help everybody, and you're going to listen to everybody. I mean, to say, and I have found that with so many people. I mean, I'm pro-choice when it comes to abortion, and I have knocked on doors, and I remember one family, this woman said, well, you're not going to like what I have to say because I have a very important issue you're going to disagree with me on. And so I said, well, let me hear. She told me, and I said, I can understand how deeply you feel about that issue, where we see it differently, but we had a long chat. Well, she and her entire family ended up supporting me, even though we disagreed on a very important issue. But it's not just about whether somebody votes for you or not. It's about, in my view, do they feel heard, and do they feel you are trying to represent them to the best of your ability. I'm not going to represent her by voting against my principles, but I'm going to represent her by listening to her, engaging her, and if there's an issue that she has that I can solve or represent, I will do that regardless of who voted for me or not.
I think honesty is really important here, right? And I think that's what you.
But don't we all, I mean, we're all going to try to help people in our
Oh, totally, yes. If it's a constituency issue, I mean, I ran in Edmonton, Alberta. I won by small numbers, as some of you know.
Annie?
Yes.
Yes.
And in fact, a lot of the people we helped, my office staff and I helped, were not people who voted for me. You could tell when they came, but they were always very happy when I was able to help them and get their family into the country or whatever it was. But it's important to be honest, right? Don't pretend that you agree when you don't, right? Because then that is unethical. You are not being honest with yourself, and you're not being honest with them. And I think that is one of the definitions of a lack of ethical grounding. But to Peggy's point, there are ways you can, listen and be respectful. Again, a part of being an ethical person is being respectful. And you can be respectful of the other point of view, but you must be honest. I could, like Peggy, I could never ever suggest to anyone that I would change my views on a woman's right to choose. Ever. But one can have a respectful conversation and you can listen, but you have to be honest with the person with whom you're having that conversation. And my experience is sort of like yours, although they probably didn't vote for me. They would say, okay, thank you for listening, and they'd walk away, but at least they felt that they'd been heard. And that's, in some cases, the very best a hard-working elected official can do.
Can I just say one other little piece? I remember knocking on the door one time, and this woman said to me, well, I really like you, but I don't like that the NDP is so close to unions. And I said, full disclosure, I'm a union rep. Because I wasn't going to deny it, and then she, I know, and I was proud of it. But.
I say the stories here are all about people meeting people at the doors. And when I
Or in
was,
my office.
or your office, yeah, the constituency. When I was hiring staff at PMO, I tried to always make sure I hired staff who had been door to door with somebody over the course of at least one election campaign and several. I've been very fortunate to go door to door with some superb door to door people. I've learned a lot from going door to door with people. At every election campaign, even when I was a staffer, I tried to get out for a shift of door to door work.
Say quickly quickly, I think the bridge to what you're asking is allowing free vote on things like private members' bills. So instead of voting against every single private member's bill, and it happens in Ontario right now, every single private member's bill, unless it is introduced by a government member, gets voted down regardless. And I think that bridging that gap for the voters, saying, you know what, I don't really like the party that, or as a mayor, I don't like the party that this person represents, but I like that person, gives that person then the opportunity to show them that, I can support ideas from other parties. Very good private members' bills get voted down every single day just because there's some monopoly on a good idea.
Yeah, real quick. I'm a philosophy professor here, and I do teach ethics. And one can think of ethics in a kind of moral framework, but ethics and politics can overlap with that. But it seems like sometimes it doesn't overlap with that. And I think the example given very early, so if one took, for example, ministerial responsibility, that's a scenario where the minister may have no relevant details of something that happens in minutiae. But something that blows up turns out to be really important, and at the end of the day, the minister is responsible for it. And if it's serious enough, the minister should resign, even though that's personally unfair to the minister. The minister has nothing to do with the decision, but that sounds like something that's politically ethical, but unfair. So I'm just wondering if when you think about politics and ethics, there's a domain of the politically ethical that's quite distinct from the morally ethical.
Or who wants to start?
I think you're probably right that the ethical, I guess if it were a Venn diagram, there's a bunch of overlap, but there's also some separation there. And we are of a system where you mentioned ministerial responsibility specifically, where ministerial responsibility has been for centuries, at least 3, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian or Peggy, an important bedrock principle. But what you see is actually that principle being eroded in ways that I don't always like. I think you have to distinguish between a problem that is one that the minister, it is not of their making. They did not benefit from it. It is something they take full responsibility for and apologize for. Probably in our current system, it's run up to the ethics commissioner for a rule, and the opposition will ensure that happens. And as we've seen recently in the Trudeau government, some of those things have happened. Ministers haven't resigned. Actually, there have been some cases where I would have thought the minister should have resigned, and Mr. Kretchen, remember the famous David Collinette letter to an immigration official. David was gone within 24 hours, right? Mr. Kretchen said, no, you're gone. And you have to be, if you like, rehabilitated. I mean, that's a ridiculous term. But you can come back eventually, right? And he did. But he was a very good minister. He was Minister of Defense. He was dealing with the Somalian fiasco. All that, kind of stuff. But Mr. Kretchen was clear. No, you are responsible. Now, that was not as a minister. That was actually in his role as an MP, representing a constituent. He wrote a letter to the Immigration Board. So it actually wasn't in his ministerial role, but Mr. Kretchen felt that it was going to make that role difficult as well. And therefore, he was removed from cabinet and stepped aside and became a backbench MP for a period of time. But to your point, I think, yes, there are different circumstances, in part because of the rules around ministerial responsibility, where the two, if you like, concepts of ethical conduct, morality, don't fit nicely together. They're not not contiguous, but you know what I mean. They don't completely overlap, right? I think there is difference there.
I think a mistake we made, let me start with that sentence. How's that? Have I got your attention now? A mistake we made. I was very heavily involved in the ethics reform package that we passed at the beginning of the Harper government, Canada. And both in the design of it, and then in the drafting of it, and then in the multi-party negotiations to get it passed through the Senate. Less said about that, the better. And then the early implementation of it. I think on the whole, I mean, it's a complicated package, so you can get into the details of what I think about it after the fact, but on the whole, it's pushed us into a direction of ethics for elected officials that was focused on, I don't want to suggest they're not important issues, but they're small ball issues. Like, who did you get these hockey tickets from? That's an important issue because
But
it
it
can
is small
come to
ball.
influence. But it doesn't go to, it was intended to, but the focus of that was on, how did you raise this money? Have you regulated you and your spouses and your adult children under the age of 30 or whatever that, I can't remember what they put up is, in a way that can pass this kind of public scrutiny and so forth, all of which matters. The part that didn't fire for that package of ethics reforms was the ministerial responsibility for what goes on in the department side of it. And there was a section that was intended to deal with that, and for a variety of reasons didn't work out as we had, sort of as I had expected. And I think that is now focused because we have a whole bureaucracy around the ethics commissioner and rulings and so on and so forth. Mr. Trudeau goes to the island with the Aga Khan, and we get a big discussion about how to make decisions about where the Prime Minister goes on vacation. Again, these are not important issues. That matters. I think the Prime Minister current Prime Minister acted poorly in that respect. I don't have a problem with the ethics commissioner's ruling in that respect. But in the case of the SNC level, I think the ethics commissioner got that wrong. I think the Prime Minister acted bad about it. I think it was an ethics issue. The part that because of that urge, we still focus on this kind of small ball part of the ethics package. Again, not that it's not important, but at the expense of not holding ministers to the floor for what goes on in their department. Not necessarily they have to resign over something they weren't aware of, but if a problem emerges and they're not taking quick action to resolve the issue, that's an issue.
Or they caused the problem.
Yeah. Well, if they cause a problem, I think that's uncontestable. And I think that's a part that we have to make a deliberate effort to bring the focus back to that, because under the current circumstances, with the amount of business going through the Essex Commissioner's office, we're never going to get back to that. We're going to continue to focus on the other things.
So I'm just going to pause and we'll go to the question over here.
Yeah. Well, I guess you guys kind of already answered it, but I'd love to just keep the conversation going, just speaking a little bit more towards young people. I wrote it down, and I really appreciated specifically Bobby Ann's discussion about staying true to your values regardless of party lines. And with younger people getting into politics and demonstrating interest in getting involved, discussions about more pressing and, in many cases, controversial issues are really being tabled. Recently, issues surrounding the rights of queer and trans folks and environmental regulations, to name a few. So what do you say to people, specifically youth, who want to have these opinions tabled that aren't exactly being tabled in the House of Commons as much as some of them would like to?
But if I understand you correctly, it's how do young people get involved to change significant issues that they don't feel are getting enough attention. And I would just say, in my experience, nothing changes without people organizing and pushing for that change. And whether it's trying to build a local hockey rink or change policy on human rights, it takes organizing, getting people together, deciding what it is you want, and then getting involved and pushing for it. And there are so many opportunities to get involved, whether it's at your local riding association, your electoral district, and we were just talking about some of them may not be as strong as they need to be. And I hear, from people who say, well, nobody wants to get involved. But funny, it's the same 4 or 5 people who have like a cast iron lock on the riding association that nobody else can get into. And I think there really needs to be a rejuvenation of a lot of our riding associations to engage young people and make sure, not just young people, but to make sure they really are representative of the community. And being a delegate to bodies like your councils or conventions, whatever political persuasion you are, getting there and being able, again, to organize there, put a resolution in or a motion in to try to change policy. And, sometimes it's a simple thing like taking a a petition for something and going door to door, that's a great way to engage people, and then you can report back to them and let them know how you've done on environmental issues. That's often a popular thing depending where you are. So there's lots of ways to get involved. I think parties don't do a very good job of letting people know how they can get involved. But if you have values that you want to act on and get involved in and make change over, being engaged in a political party is a good way to do that, and organizing within that structure. And if the party doesn't respond, then you can go Bobby Ann's route and just get her done yourself.
I'd just add that you're in one of the best places to actually form associations. The university, like the campuses, are great places to get involved in associations that will then, go to legislative bodies and lobby. At Queen's Park in Ontario, I'm continually meeting. When I'm there, my mornings are filled with what I call lobbyist type appointments, and many of them are young people who various issues, and they get the same airtime as anyone else. They get the same airtime as doctors and lawyers and everyone else who asks to meet with me. So I'd say get involved in it. You don't have to belong to a political party. You don't have to have a stripe, but if there's an issue that you're passionate about, by all means reach out to members and say, hey, I want to meet with you on this.
One of the tools your generation has is social media. You can amplify your voice in ways that none of our generations when we were your age could, right? You could write a letter to the paper or go to a meeting or something. But you have the tools through social media to amplify your message, reach more people more quickly than most of us even today think is possible, right? And quite honestly, you can stir up a heck of a lot of trouble. If you want to, trouble in the best sense, right? You can cause established parties and local politicians a lot of heartache if you're good, if you've got a bunch of like-minded people who are really good at social media, and you can become a force. And that's another way today that young people bring about policy change and social change. Yes, you should be joining community organizations and political parties if that is your comfort level. But today there are so many other networks, quite literally networks, that young people can use to make change or get people's attention so that you then have the opportunity to seek change.
Okay, Nancy.
Okay. I get the great job of saying thank you. Thank you all for being here. First and foremost, thank you to the panel for taking the time and sharing your expertise, and to Alex for organizing everything. If you don't know Acadia, I think many of you do. You're community members in one form or another. But this is a fantastic place to live, work, play. And if you have any questions about it, I'm here for a few more minutes. I see we have a former governor of the board here as well. As I look out here, I'm just poking out and seeing all the people who I know. So thank you again for being here. I forget what else I had to say. Oh yes, of course, people are staying around for a few minutes if you'd like to come and meet them and say hello. I'm sure some of the conversations will continue because the passion is there in the room. And again, thank you. That's it.